Hello. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Bob Heilbrunner, and I'm teaching a course at the local extension service of the local university. And the course is called Living a Meaningful Living Meaningful Lives in Hard Times. And the subtitle of the course is Belonging to Ourselves, Each Other, and the Planet. Um, Today, this is class 2 of that course, and the focus of it is fascism, discussing fascism for obvious reasons, since we're living with the drumbeat of fascism, trying to live meaningful lives in that context, meaningful, joyful, and nourished, spiritually nourished lives in that context. So today's class is on fascism, which is the extreme political manifestation of the general disease of our current civilization, which the course is organized to make explicit and to explicate and to help people find their place in the process of resisting and transforming that paradigm into a new paradigm, and new and life-nourishing paradigm. So the course says the context of the course is that we're living in the paradigm of narcissism, which could also, and that can be mapped as a set of nested, like a Russian doll, nested spheres, from the personal to the social to the political to the economic to the ecological to the spiritual sphere. And then in each of those spheres, the narcissistic paradigm teaches that the world is that the basic way of understanding the world and operating in the world is as a struggle for dominance among fundamentally incompatible interests, and that the option is to dominate or to be dominated. And that manifests in personal loneliness, in separating us from our own spiritual, psychological, instinctual connection with nature and spirit, that it affects how we relate to other human beings, that it affects how we relate to other species, how we relate to the environment, how we relate to other races and other sexes, and so forth and so on. And then on every level, that paradigm celebrates dominance over what's considered other, and what's considered other is whatever is not the dominantly celebrated, not what's being called to dominance. And the basic belief is that is manifesting in such a destructive way, in genocide, in species extinction, in wars, in cruelty, in meanness, in environmental destruction, in destruction of living communities and of sense of membership in community, in loneliness, isolation, and distrust of our own basic nature. That's the costs of that paradigm are becoming apparent and unsustainable, and that is the point at which nature is asking of us in increasingly stern terms to think of something new. And that what's needed new, I'm calling a paradigm of communion or of belonging. And that would be a paradigm that it recognizes the communality and interdependence of everything that lives on everything else, and of which the dominant metaphors would be belonging, membership, communion, mutuality, mutual dependence, community, co-creation, network, web of life, chorus, symphony, the Native American view of all our relations, that we are related to everything, including canyons and rivers, that we're all in this together, and the idea of doing unto others as you would have them do unto you. And in the Christian version of the teaching, Christ said, whatsoever ye do unto the least of these, ye do unto me, meaning whatever you do to any living thing, you're doing to God, because God is immanent in everything. And that the hole in the other guy's side of the boat is your problem. So that would be the paradigm of communion, and the paradigm of narcissism, the dominant paradigm. Well, it is the notion that life is a struggle for dominance between opposing forces, and that the choice is to dominate or be dominated. And the dominant metaphors of that are a contest, a battle, a competition, conflict, war, hierarchy, dominance. And the slogan for that might be, do unto others before they do unto you. So the course is organized around how do we each resist the old paradigm and assist the transformation into the new. And the other principle of the course is that paradigms have a life cycle, that they are born to bring in new consciousness, to flower, to deteriorate, to die, and to give birth to something new. And that something new is born out of the failures and out of the false promises, the unfulfilled promises of the old. It's ongoingly built by living people in the interstices of the existing paradigm. And that at the point when the failures of the existing paradigm become too costly and unsustainable and apparent, that's when there's the opportunity for the birth of a new transition to a new paradigm. So that's the bigger context. And in that, fascism, now I'm going to the topic of the day, which is fascism. Fascism is the extreme of the political manifestation of the principles of the narcissistic system. Fascism sees everything as a polarity and a struggle for dominance between the parts of that polarity, them and us, and to fight for one side and to defeat and destroy the other. In the paradigm of communion, polarities are a dialogue between sides of the truth, and there's a search for the underlying unity that underlies the polarity, such as the individual and the social, the part and the whole, that those are wholes of a unitary reality rather than ones where one thing has to be destroyed for the sake of the other. So I had a dream that I woke up from a couple of years ago. And I don't remember the dream itself. It's just kind of weird. I woke up with the conclusion of the dream, the intellectual conclusion, the upshot. And what I woke up with was, oh, I get fascism. Fascism is a hatred of life. Fascism is a hatred of life. And then I thought about it, and I thought it's kind of deceptive because fascism claims to celebrate life. In the German version, for instance, it celebrates victory and health and robustness and physical prowess and beauty and fertility and vigorance and dominance and assertion and virility. It wasn't even anti-sexual because they wanted to breed the race. So it seems like it's a celebration of life, but life is a cycle, and life includes birth, ascension, decline, and death, in which death is the fertile ground for the ongoing birth of the next thing. Death is a condition of life. That's most apparent when you walk in the forest and you see the needles and the leaves and the duff that are creating the soil for the next thing to grow. So winning is only half of life. Winning and dominance is only half of life. So then I got, okay, so let's say fascism celebrates half of life. But if you celebrate only half of life, if you don't embrace victory and defeat, strength and vulnerability, birth and death, dominance and interdependence, self-assertion and surrender on the individual, racial, or species level, separateness and union, strength and vulnerability. If you don't embrace all of those polarities, but only half, then you're celebrating only half of life. And so I kind of amended my original notion, which was you can't love life if you don't accept both parts of life and the wholeness that unites life's polarities. So fascism is actually a hatred of half of life. Fascism is a hatred of half of life. But if you hate half of life, then you hate real life. And of course, if you claim only half of life, then the orphaned and unintegrated other aspects of life goes into the shadow and emerges in unmitigated form, out of control of a of a balancing consciousness, of an integrating consciousness. That's like Jung's idea of archetypes. For instance, there's an archetype of the king. And if you can be aware, oh, I'm being touched by the archetype of a king. But if that happens unconsciously, then it's out of control. And then instead of being aware and having a consciousness that you're being affected by that archetype, then it's running you, it's ruling you unconsciously. And you become a king. You really think you're a king and therefore act in ways that are inappropriate and destructive. So the idea of celebrating life and virility and all that stuff goes underground and comes out in for instance, in the SS, where there was a cult of death. So fascism actually rains death on the other, rains a cult of constitute a cult of death and rains it on the other. Now, Hitler, as you know, wrote a book called Triumph of the Will, and that advocates the victory of the will over weakness, vulnerability, soft-heartedness, emptiness, surrender, basically over feeling and love, over the emotional part of the loving part of human beings that attaches to and has empathy for and cares about other living things. Fascism rejects the vulnerable part of the self and projects it projects those denied qualities onto the other, onto the Jews, onto the gays, onto crippled people, onto artists, onto, well, ultimately onto everybody, onto social democrats, onto communists, and so forth. But it projects weakness onto the other, and there, where it can be, not integrated, as in knowing your own weaknesses and vulnerability and loving yourself to your wholeness, including your vulnerableness, it projects it where it can be in the other, where it can be defeated. Immigrants, for instance, where it can be defeated, despised, vanquished, shamed, exterminated, and genocided. So Hitler's internal narcissism gets projected onto the world scale. And that's where personal narcissism and fascism as a political system meet. Now, I've been fascinated by, if your only value is victory, if the only thing you care about is triumph and domination, how do you handle losing? How do you handle losing? And there's a movie called Downfall, made in Germany, with Bruno Ganz, who was he's old in this movie, but was a major matinee idol of German creative theater and worked with Werner Herzog and other folks. Downfall is a movie of Hitler in the bunker, a story of Hitler in the bunker, underground, having been defeated. And it's well documented because it is based on witnessing by some young women who were recruited as secretaries, and they weren't particularly Nazis or anything, but they were honored to be chosen to be secretaries to the Führer in the underground bunker. But they tell the story, and so it's a pretty well documented story. But the thought is, you cannot be more defeated than Hitler in the bunker. Hitler is holed up, hiding in a bunker underground, while his people, not the ones that he exterminated, but his people, his German people, are digging through the rubble of Berlin for scraps of food, for anything, for scraps of clothing, digging through the rubble of Berlin. And the Russian troops are coming in, or at the gates of town and coming in and taking over. So you cannot be more defeated. And this is 9 years after the beginning of depending on how you date it, but roughly 9 years into the 1,000-year Reich, Hitler's 1,000-year Reich. So how does he handle that? Is it a growth experience? Anyway, the story goes that the Nazi general, these are hardened Nazi generals, come into the bunker and beg him, would he please surrender? Because they can't stand executing 11-year-old kids and 85-year-old men for desertion because they're not picking up broom handles or whatever weapons they can find to fight the Russian army, which has just defeated the German army. The Russian army is there. And they're having to execute for desertion old people and kids, the remaining people who are being asked to defend Berlin. And they say, please, would you surrender so we can't keep doing this. And that's the plot of the movie, is basically these Nazi generals coming in and saying, please. And at one point, Albert Speer, the architect, a true Nazi, by the way, but that architect of the great buildings and monumental buildings that were supposed to be the basis for the 1,000-year Reich, architect comes in and says to Hitler, "These are your people. Why won't you surrender? These are your people. Have you no mercy? Have you no caring for your people?" And Hitler says, now this is it. Hitler says, "I thought the German people were victors. And it turns out they were losers. They let me down. I bet on them and they let me down. Let them die. Why save their bodies when their spirit has already been broken by showing them, by having proved themselves losers?" The German people let Hitler down. So Hitler projects his loserness on his people, where even his people, having already projected it onto Jews and socialists and gay people and handicapped people and so forth, his loserness onto now the whole German people who have let him down. Now that, of course, is going to sound a little familiar in terms of not being able to possibly integrate that you have lost. Trump does this in his way. Trump's not lying when he says he won. He simply is compelled psychologically by his psychological disease, compelled to imagine and create the reality that his psychological state requires, and then to insist that everyone else bow down to that false reality. But he's not lying. He's just feels privileged to create the reality that he imagines and that he needs. So, obvious question is, how does this fly? How does this fly? And that takes me back to the principle I talked to in the first class, that we have an instinctual need and yearning, and a need that is part of our ability to cooperate and to create culture, for better or for worse, to cooperate together, to create culture together, to change the world together, for better or for worse. But part of our ascension, if you want to call it that, or part of our ability to have as much power in the world as we do, is due to an instinctual basis. That instinctual basis will be apparent when I say it. It comes from tribal, our 99% of our history that was lived in tribal life and is productive for tribal life in certain ways. And it'll be tested whether or not it works for the reach of our current powers to change and affect the world. But the yearning is adaptive and is a gift from evolutionary process. And it is a learning to be, this is the phrase now, to be a meaningful, empowered, contributing, and respected part of a meaningful whole that's worthy of our allegiance and ultimately sacred. We have a deep instinctual yearning to be a meaningful, empowered, contributing, and respected part of a meaningful whole, worthy of our allegiance and ultimately sacred. And it's like I said, it's the foundation of our ability to sacrifice for the whole, to build a culture based on the accumulation of cultural learning. It's the basis of our ability to desire to create personal bonds, to have empathy, to nurture our young, to be a social animal. So it's been adaptive for 99% of our human history. When those needs are met, we are healthy, happy, meaning, and feel that our lives are meaningful. When we're not, we are sick, vulnerable, and dangerous. And we are especially vulnerable to fascism's offer of a fake membership, of a membership in the glory of the great leader, a membership in which we're not really empowered, in which we're not really asked to contribute except maybe our lives, but not in any kind of leadership role, and in a whole that is not meaningful. We're not respected members because we can be thrown out of it the minute we don't agree with the great leader. That, how to just look at how Trump has discarded his chosen people at various ongoingly. It keeps discharging them. It's not worthy of our allegiance, and it's not truly sacred. So, and for instance, in the case of the Germans, they were a crushing war for which was demanded an unconditional surrender and a huge national shame and disempowerment. And that was part of making the German people vulnerable. I'm not excusing it, but that's just the reality of it. And I'm also thinking of Israel. There is the PTSD of the Jewish people from the Holocaust that's now being expressed in PTSD of that's reflected in the fascist Israeli government and its genocide or attempted genocide of the Palestinian people. So in the US now, we have a great dislocation. The nation state has not stood up for the multinational corporations to take care of the needs of the economy, of and to leave people feeling empowered and part of, and the breakdown of the social contract that held people in some level of satisfaction in the American system, in the U.S. system. So the great dislocation, the loss of standing, the loss of status, loss of respect, the loss of material security, employment, economic survival. For instance, just that we live in a world in which teachers can't afford to live in the communities they're teaching in. And this leaves people vulnerable to a fake empowerment and to fake membership and fake allegiance to a fake whole. It offers an identity to bask in the glory of the great all-powerful leader. And it offers a model of leadership that's basically being an unaccountable bully. And the attraction of being unaccountable and not responsible to and the attraction of a leader who is unaccountable and non-responsible to any restrictions, we're especially vulnerable in our society to that, because in a society that doesn't offer a model of a healthy empowerment, that doesn't offer a model of a servant leader who respects others, who serves the needs of the whole, and who's accountable to the whole. Failing a model of that kind of a leader, the idea of someone who's going to wreck everything and isn't going to just say that what he's supposed to say has an appeal because it's something that most of us on some level would like to be able to do. But the main thing is there's no model of belonging, of being both, to both fully manifest ourselves, to both fully manifest ourselves and be respectful of others and grateful for the great web of life that makes us possible. That sense of belonging that would bridge the distinction between self and others and part and whole. So part of the paradigm of narcissism is Goebbels' great lie. Scapegoat and is Goebbels' great lie, and a scapegoating and dividing of people, a stoking of fear and hatred of the other, and the other as those not empowered by the system. So instead of the other, being the oligarchs who run everything to their benefit and to the detriment of the 99% of the populace, if you can divide people up against each other and divide them where the people getting the blame are exactly the people who have the least power and influence to create the reality that we're living in, right? The irony of that who's responsible for what's wrong, and then we choose someone who is very much out of power and not, has the least stake and the least power in the creating the present system. So that splitting serves entrenched power and distracts people from finding unity in standing up for their rights and interests and participation and membership in the society of the whole. So the cure would be to live in a realistic, grounded love and appreciation of life, and to live in gratitude and joy at the gift of life we've been given. One that acknowledges the realities of death and suffering and dissolution. As part of the aging process, I've sort of noticed that aging tests the unconditionality of one's love of oneself. Can I love myself if I'm not as pretty or handsome as I used to be, if I'm not as sexy as I used to be, if I'm not as athletic as I used to be, if I'm not as competent, if I'm not as organized, I'm not as clear-headed, I'm not as creative, I'm not as whatever. Can I still love and accept myself? And that's part of because we are. So the test is, can our acceptance of life be increased? We're increasingly tested for the unconditionality of our acceptance and love of life. And does that mean, and what that means is that we're in a position where we either do or don't, but we are challenged to love a wounded world, a wounded planet, a wounded nation, and our wounded selves. Which is to say, to live in reality and in an appreciation and love and celebration of reality, which is to say that narcissism and fascism are fundamentally a delusion, and that the real enemy and downfall of narcissism and fascism is reality. So much as we may feel disempowered, we have reality. We have reality on our side.